In this video, I'm going to give an overview on Formeister, which is a small but yet powerful library on how to build forms in React, leveraging hooks and wraps. I can't wait to show you guys how to use the wraps functionality, and you'll see how powerful it is. So if you go to formeister.com, you can see this example. This is all you really need to build your form and get up and running. So essentially just import React with useState function, and you import form from Formeister. And here you optionally can import some field wraps that you write yourself, which are just functions that return JSX. And you initialize your state. Then you put your form component, and then you have two required fields here, form state and set form state, and all you do is you just pass in the form state object and the set form state function, and then optionally you can pass a default wrap, and we'll be getting to that, and then your onSubmit handler. And then within that form component, you just insert your form elements just like you normally would. And you see like the syntax is exactly the same as just any form outside of React, right? It's exactly the same. There's no like special field component like you might see with other libraries. So here you'll see on the third input you'll have a wrap function that's specific for that input field. We'll be getting to that as well, but that's it. That's basically a working form right there. So, and also, let me state that state is wired up automatically for you by the name. So the name field, the value on it, I should say. And so the name value needs to be unique. So if we scroll further down, we'll go to some sandbox examples. So there's a basic form example and then one with form validation. So let's check out the basic form example in this video. So this pretty much just works as you would think. So just Jonathan, and then so what happens is once so on the side here, all we're doing is just rendering the object form state. So we have values. So this is the value of the field. So here we have Jonathan for the field F name. And then we have a touched array, which is currently empty. But once we click out of the field, then you'll see it'll be added to that array. And then if we go to the next one, Mellow, same thing. And here as well. And this is my bio. So for the checkbox, for example, you have a true or false. And for radio buttons, you have just a regular key value. And then here you have a select. And then when you hit the send button, you can do whatever you want with that object. You got your values, and that's really what you want. So now let's take a look at the code. So it's very similar to what we just went over, but you import React and use state. You import form from Formeister. Here we have field wraps that we made ourselves. And again, the wraps are just functions. And then here we're importing the component that we see on the side right here whenever we see our state. That's what that is. Then here we have our app function. We initialize state, then we have a submit function, and on the submit function we get a event, and then we also get our form state and set form state. So like once we submit everything and everything is good, then what you would want to do is use this function to reset everything, reset the form state to blank, basically. And so then we go to the return, and we're using Bootstrap. So this is just Bootstrap boilerplate. And then on line 24, we finally get to our form component. And here we have our two required fields, which is our form state prop, required props, form state prop and set form state prop. And then you pass in the function. And then we have a default wrap, which we'll be getting to shortly, and then the onSubmit handler function. And then here we get into, again, right here's like a little bit of Bootstrap boilerplate, the form row, div with the form row class. And then finally we get into the fields themselves. So if you see here, and if you are a little familiar with Bootstrap, you can tell already like there's a lot of boilerplate or markup that's missing, right? And the reason is it's because it's being wrapped. It's inheriting this wrap, which is the default wrap that we assigned here. And again, we'll get to that shortly. And then, so if we go to the third one, again, it's kind of like the example before. We have a specific input field with its own special wrap that essentially overrides the default wrap. And you could see that by looking at the DOM, right? So the first two, first name, last name, they are just using the default wrap. And then the third wrap is using the special input group wrap, which is some functionality that you get with Bootstrap. So if we wanted to, we could change this to a $sign, and then you see that it uses that. And if, for example, we were to take away that prop, then it would just go away. And then if we keep going down, we come across other input fields. So here we have address, address to. Here you can, one cool thing to check out is so we have our label right here. Notice the first three don't have any label, and that's because there's no actual label prop on the first three. But on the address fields, the input fields, there is a label. But if we were to, for example, remove this, so hit save, then you see that that label went away, right? Or we could, hello, and we could just change the label just like that. And then if we go further down, we have our select, which is for the state, and that has no special prop or anything on that. It's just using the default prop. So if it doesn't have a prop individually on the element, form element, then it's just inheriting the default prop that was assigned on the form component. And then if we come down to the checkboxes, right? So actually, let's open that back up. We have one checkbox here, and then we have 3 radio buttons, one being disabled, one of those 3 being disabled. So if we look here, our checkbox and our radio buttons share or use the check wrap, right? They have that prop, and we pass in the check wrap. And if we scroll further down, we go to the other select form element. This one has a wrap prop, but it's false, which means that you're not inheriting the prop on the form component, and you're also not passing anything in. You're just saying like, no, just leave it as it is. No wraps. You're not inheriting. If the form component didn't have a default wrap, well then you wouldn't need to pass this wrap false, just because it wouldn't inherit anything. And then here you have your button, exactly as you would expect it to be. And then we got our render component to render the form state, and all we do is pass the form state. So the nice thing is that the form state is initialized outside of the form component, right? So initialize outside and then just pass those in, which then allows us to easily use that form state in other areas of the app. So now let's go into our field wraps. So that way we could get better idea of how all this extra markup that we're not seeing right now is being inserted into the DOM. So here's our field wrap file. And let's start all the way at the bottom. Here all we're doing is just exporting the functions. So here we have our default wrap, and this is what's applied to the form component. And what you get is a field function. So this field variable is a function, and then you get the form state, right? So it's just the object of the current state of the form. And here what we're doing is destructuring the props on that field. So we essentially execute that function, dot props, and we get the name and the label, right? And where that's coming from is essentially it's this, right? So you got your input, you got your name, and then what's the other thing? The label. So in these examples, this first three, we're not using labels. But for example, for the addresses, we have the name, and then we are using the label, right? So then if we go to the return, we have our opening div tag, right? And that has a class name of a form group. But then we'll get to this in a little bit. This is just basically a function that you can create yourself, but I'll explain why. It just makes things a little better. Again, it's nothing related to Formeister. It's just a function that you could create yourself, which is up here. But we'll get to that in a second. So then on this line, we have just curly braces or brackets, whatever you want to call them, essentially saying if there's a label, then render this label, these label tags, right? And if there's not, then just enter or just return nothing. And then here on this line, we have our field function, and then we are able to pass in an object of props. So in this case, class name, form control. So every element with Bootstrap, it uses form control. So it's okay to have this as a default. Actually, every element except for check wraps. So the checks, like the check buttons or the radio buttons, they actually don't use their the form control. So that's why we have a custom wrap for those. But so anyway, for the most part, they do. And so here's let's look at an example of how powerful this is. So for addresses, you have here we have our label, right? So we're taking our label and inserting it in between those tags, right? But what if we want to pass in, for example, on that same address field, we have a placeholder here, right? We also have access to that. You have access to anything, just like well, let me just show you. So here we could just go placeholder, and then we just insert it right here, placeholder, and there you go. So now the label is essentially the data from the placeholder. And so if we go over to input group wrap, which is the wraps for this special type of display that you have here with a $sign, all we're doing is we're getting that prepend prop and just passing it in right there. I mean, that's how that works. Another capability that's related to specifically to Formeister is when you have your field function, right? This is what the actual field is, right? Like this is it's a field function, and so you can pass your own props here. So here we have class name, but we also have a prop called append class, which essentially, if there's already a class on that input, like so for example, if we go to the first name and we have class name cool, right? Then what it'll do, it's going to append what's here, right? So form control. So if we right click here, inspect, we'll have cool space form control. and that's what you see. So here's the input, here's a class, cool, and then you have form control. If we go back and were to change this to class name, it's just going to override it. So you see that there. And that's really cool when, well, it's really useful when the individual forms need their specific class name that you need to control it in whatever way. Like maybe this field right here needs some specific styling, custom styling that you need that's not part of Bootstrap, and you want to give it that class name, then you put it here, and then that way you could still use your default prop and just add append class, and it's not going to override what you have in the input JSX. So that's about it for the basic form. Before I end the video, I actually wanted to just kind of give you a sneak preview of the form with validation using yup. So let's go there. So let's just run through this. So basically the first and last name requires at least 2 characters. So if we type J, the yup validation is going to run. So before, in the basic form, we just had values and we had touched, right? But now in this example, we have errors, we also have success and loading. So whenever you type or anything changes in the fields, it's going to trigger the validation. And so here you can see that it's already validating first name, last name, and username. So it must be at least 2 characters. Last name is a required field. And these are things that the messages, you could change them however you want. And the reason, so what happened is I typed J and then I clicked out of that field, and so it attached the touched. And so the messages, the logic works that as long as the field hasn't been touched, then it's not going to show any error message, which is why even though there's error messages here in the form state, but because I haven't actually clicked on the last name and then clicked out of it, then it doesn't show anything, right? So if I click in, click out, then it'll show. And right now it's saying it's required because it's completely empty. So if I type ME, but then just go back to M, now it says must be at least 2 characters. So let's finish this, Jonathan. And then for the username, it's a required field, but it also requires at least 3 characters. And so what will happen here as I type, so when I type the 3rd character, it's actually going to make a request to the server to see if this username is available. And so what will happen is you'll see the field name be added to the loading array, and then once it finds it. It's not actually making a request. I'm just doing like a wait, a timeout function, and then once it comes back, then it goes into the success array. So N, and now it's successful. But if I go erase N, now it says must be at least 3 characters. And then when I type L or whatever, it loads and then it finds it. And obviously, yeah, I mean, you could customize this however you want. So this is just an example. I want to give you a sneak preview real quick of what you could do with validation. And before I end this video, I just want to go back to the site. So you could read a lot more at formeister.com. We have, you can find the sandboxes here and some documentation. And then we have a wrap section. And what I would like to do here is, as you can see in the video, in this tutorial, that the wraps are very composable and just reusable. So if we have bootstrap wraps, it'd be nice if you're also using Bootstrap, well, you could just copy the same wraps and then just use that in your project. Or if you're using, Foundation for your CSS or whatever other CSS frameworks. So in the future, we'll have CSS wraps for all the different frameworks. You can just come in here and copy and paste it, and you'll save so much time using this. Anyway, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video, and we'll check out Formeister. Thank you very much.